diplomatic standoff between India and Canada continues. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has admitted to the first time the presence of Khalistanis in his country. In an unexpected statement, Trudeau acknowledged the presence of a Khalistan support base with Canada, but quickly added they do not represent the Sikh community as a whole. Earlier this week, Khalistanis had clashed with devotees at the Hindu Sabha Temple in Brampton, wherein even women and children were not spared, which the Canadian Prime Minister condemned but took no action against. Now, it's important to note that Khalistani admission by Trudeau comes just 3 days after Donald Trump's big win in the US presidential polls. The big question then is, will these confessions by Justin Trudeau be backed by action? Well, from Trudeau's Khalistan admission to a statement that he made a year ago where he labelled Hardeep Singh Nijjar a Canadian citizen instead of a Khalistani terrorist, let's listen in to Trudeau's tumultuous U-turn.
Last number of weeks, Canadian security agencies have been actively pursuing credible allegations of a potential link between agents of the government of India and the killing of a Canadian citizen, Hardeep Singh Nijjar.
There are many supporters of Khalistan in Canada, but they do not represent the Sikh community.
Ambassador Bhashpati Mukherjee, former diplomat, is joining us live. We also have Professor Rohan Gunaratna, international terrorism expert, live with us. Adit Kothari, founding member, Indic Society, is live with us. Professor Madhav Nalapat, editorial director of the Sunday Guardian, also joins us live. Professor Nalapat, let me begin with you first. What do you make of this? Okay, I think we've lost that connection with Professor Nalapat, I believe. Ambassador Mukherjee, what do you make of this admission by Justin Trudeau, a Freudian slip, or an acknowledgement that Khalistanis are there on Canadian soil?
I don't think it's a Freudian slip. I think it demonstrates the immediate effect of President-designate Donald Trump's election victory and how it's going to change the nature of politics globally, including with Trudeau. In fact, Trudeau had announced yesterday, I think, that he is going to be reordering the desk in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Canada that deals with the Canadian-US bilateral partnership, keeping in mind lessons learned of the first Trump presidency. That is the statement that came out. In this particular case, I think he also had to deal with the public outrage of very large number of Indian diaspora because India was forced, the High Commission was forced to cancel the consular camps in Toronto and may be forced to cancel other consular camps, including those scheduled in Vancouver, etc., if security is not given. And on the other hand, if the Canadian government refuses to make a distinction, which Trudeau has just made, between Khalistanis who are a fringe minority and who do not represent majority Sikh opinion in Canada, and therefore to treat them as the spokesperson of Sikhs in Canada and of India's Punjab is a huge strategic error on the part of Trudeau, because he is alienating diaspora who are Canadian citizens and who have the right to vote and who are there in much larger numbers than these fringe Khalistanis. So I think that maybe he's finally seeing the writing on the wall. He's a smart guy. He's not stupid at all. He's a politician. He's managed to hang on through thick and through thin. For him, what matters, as we say in Hindi, is kissa kursi ka, which means you are stuck to your chair. You don't want to give up your chair, right? So whether it's in India or in Canada, the adage sticks. Us kissa kursi ka, he wants to stick to the chair. He is going to face a no confidence motion sooner or later, and he is probably trying to make amends in whatever limited way he can. Although he has alienated in a very large way huge numbers of Indian diaspora in Canada who believe that the manner in which he has gutted the bilateral relationship has caused not only huge problems for them, but will cause huge problems for Canada too, because it will affect their consular services in India, because everything is reciprocal with them. So those are my opening comments. Thank you.
All right, let me quickly take that across to Professor Gunaratna as well. Professor Gunaratna, what do you make of Justin Trudeau's admission? What ramifications will this big statement by Trudeau have, and what has led to this U-turn by the Canadian Prime Minister?
Justin Trudeau has better understood the problem currently in Canada. That is, many of the migrant and the diaspora communities that faced some kind of insurgency or terrorist campaign in their homelands, a segment of them got radicalized. And they raised funds, they did propaganda, they procured weapons in Canada. It is, no one can dispute that the Tamil Tigers, for example, their single largest contribution came from Canada. And with Canadian funds, a number of terrorist attacks were conducted in Sri Lanka. And it was the same case in India. I remember myself having discussions with officers in Punjab, and they told me that Babar Khalsa International was founded in Canada and established in India. So my own view is that the Canadians have understood the problem. But India should not embarrass Canada. India and Canada should work together, mostly behind the scenes, to address these issues, especially after the Trump being elected. I think that the Canadians understand that they have to work with the Americans. Trump has zero tolerance against terrorism. Trump doesn't want any of these terrorist groups around, you see. So I believe that this is a golden opportunity for India and Canada to work behind closed doors to address this issue, to do joint training, joint operations, to dismantle the Khalistani terrorists and the extremist infrastructure on Canadian soil. And there's no better moment than today.
Okay, Adit Kothari, come in here. Adit Kothari, after this admission by Justin Trudeau, will this be followed by action as well? Or was this something that, was just an aberration for the Canadian Prime Minister?
I personally believe that it is...
for the first time, I'll have to disagree with Professor Gunaratna here. Primarily, the reason why I wanted to disagree with the motion is primarily because I think this was just a monkey balancing act at the end of the day. He was invited to an Indian diaspora meet and he was just trying to play to the gallery. In reality, the political reality of Canada is very different. If you look at the way the political interest groups work, the Gurudwaras represent the political interest groups for the Sikh communities, which is pretty much controlled by the Khalistani elements in Canada. So the funding is basically controlled by the Khalistani elements who are funding all the three major political parties, whether that be the NDP, whether that be the Liberals or the Conservatives. In fact, so much so, even yesterday, Tim Uppal, who is the deputy chair of the Conservative Party, was at the Malton Gurudwara, which is one of the most nefarious and one of the most terror pandering gurudwaras in Canada. That's the gurudwara from where multiple calls for terrorism have been raised. It houses images of Khalistani terrorists who've killed about 70 odd Hindus in a single day. So at the end of the day, we have to see how disproportionately the polity panders to the Khalistani elements. The RCMP, the Peel police go into the most rabid and feral gurudwaras to conduct their employment drives. And they are the people who've basically entrenched into the polity, into the bureaucracy, and into the law enforcement agencies. So the disproportionate kind of pandering that happens, it happens on all levels of the government machinery, which is why the polity is forced to pander to them. Ultimately, the Hindus vote not as a consolidated bloc, neither do they have any representation from a political interest group, which is why no political party actually ventures out to pander to them and cater to their interests, so to speak. So I'll leave it there for my opening comments, Sudhirji.
Yes, sir. Do we have Professor Nalapat now with us?
Yes.
Okay, Professor Nalapat, I was trying to come to you earlier on this big statement by Justin Trudeau, a slip of tongue, a candid admission, a U-turn. How do you view this statement?
Well, NewsX has always been stressing that the Khalistani element, the K element, does not represent the glorious Sikh community, and Justin Trudeau has been forced to admit that. NewsX had suggested to all Indian Canadian citizens, including Sikh Canadian citizens, Sikh Indian Canadian citizens, that they should protest at this identification of the K group as representing a glorious community. And possibly they have done that. And Justin Trudeau understands that electoral rewards are not there for this kind of thing. I think the Conservatives will also wake up to the same realization. Now, an earlier mistake was made that the most extreme fringe in the Muslim community represents the Muslim community. Now, that was before 9/11, of course. But then it took 9/11 to make people understand that that's not the case. And the overwhelming majority are very different. Here also, the overwhelming majority of Sikhs are very different. And unfortunately, Canada is creating a cocktail of future problems for itself by nurturing this group of individuals in the way it has. That's why I would certainly not favor a joint operation, for a simple reason that, as Adit has very correctly said, the Canadian system, including the police, the security services, are riddled with K elements, riddled with them. And in fact, for at least about 4 or 5 years, if not more, Canadian diplomats, frankly, and they have been active in basically talking to people, young people in the Punjab, and then you have got their informal helpers, and they brief them that if you talk pro-Khalistan, if you talk in a pro-violence manner, anti-India manner, you will be given entry into Canada. And that's exactly what these young people do. And then they get sent to Canada. There they work in, frankly, all kinds of horrible places. They technically study at universities that are not really universities. They're basically sheds, many of them. Some of them are just labels, posters on the door. And you may have 20 posters, 30 posters of 30 universities on one single door. So this is what is happening now. You're nurturing these people and you're incentivizing them in the same way as, frankly, as Mr. Gunaratne said, the LTT was nurtured in parts in Canada, and this is definitely going to come back and create problems for Canada. So joint operations, no. As far as Donald Trump is concerned, well, Donald Trump, I think, is very close to public opinion, and whether in Canada or the United States, public opinion is against terror. So which is why the more publicity is given to the violence and terror and the methods of these people, the more Canadians will turn against them. And I think that is very essential, and it has to be done from the point of view of not only the government of India, but everybody especially those who were involved in the horrors of the Punjab during the 1980s, horrors that, frankly, those who have been to Punjab during that time remember very well and don't want to see repeated in India. So you may have the cave movement very inactive in India, but very active in Canada, partly, unfortunately, Australia, United Kingdom, and the United States. Hopefully in the United States, there'll be a change. As a consequence, possibly in Australia and United Kingdom as well. As far as Justin Trudeau is concerned, whether he will really walk his recent talk is a very doubtful thing. I doubt it. I think he's trying to stave off a no confidence motion, but he's got a huge problem of credibility on his hands. So unless he demonstrates action and not just words, he's not going to be taken credibly by those who have been families of those who have been victims of his neglect. There's so many families have been victims of the neglect of his father. Thank you.
Okay, let me take that across to you as well, Ambassador Mukherjee, on, of course, how this is now going to pan out. As you said, perhaps this is an impact of the Trump presidency, but how do you believe this is going to pan out in Canada? Do we expect more admissions by Trudeau, more acknowledgements of the Khalistanis, more perhaps action as well now that words have finally come, or not?
I would say that gradually, as President Trump's inauguration happens and he takes over, etc., there will definitely be a strong difference, a strong impact on Trudeau's policies, because there was no doubt that many of the statements and many of his policies were being encouraged by the American deep state. There's no doubt about it. Canada follows the foreign policy of the United States of America. Everybody who's lived in Canada has told me that. So if Canada follows the foreign policy of the United States of America, and if the American president has a different perspective, Mr. Trudeau, as his most faithful follower, will fall in line. That will take a few months, but it will happen. But you can see that happening. Secondly, if, as Audit says, that the rest of the community, that is barring the Khalistanis, are not showing their muscle power or their money power, then that they are making a huge strategic mistake. They should do what the Indian community in the United States has done, which is to get into politics in a big way, into all the parties, to fund them like they do it in the United States, like they do it in Australia too, for that matter. And they should understand that since they are citizens of Canada, they must get into the rough and tumble of Canadian politics and fight it out. If the recruitment, as Audit is saying, is being done inside the Gurdwaras, then the Canadian security services will have huge problems in the medium and long term. It's not our problem. They will themselves find out, and if they have such officers, they will eventually be thrown out. But the Indians who are there, of Indian origin, they have to get into politics. They have to become much more aggressive. They have to make themselves matter politically to the politics of Canada, because that is the only way in which they can protect their communities, protect their lives, protect their jobs, and hang on in Canada. Right now, there are many who are planning to move to the United States. There are many who are planning to come back. There are many who are planning to move to Australia. They don't feel comfortable in Canada anymore. Why should they move out and give the ground to a small margin of Khalistanis? They should stay there and fight it out. They should not make the mistake that the Indian community, for instance, made, Uday, in Fiji, when they did not get into politics, and as a result, the 52% majority population fell to 16 to 17%. If you have embraced a country, you have to get into its politics. You have to get into its security service. You have to become a police officer. You have to be in the military. You have to fund it. You have to raise funds for them. That's the only way you can do it. And they have to do it. It can't be done by Indians and the Indian government sitting here. We can give them encouragement, but this is something they need to work out on their own. Uday.
Yes. Is that something you agree with as well, Professor Owen Gunaratna? And also, of course, as far as this statement is concerned, will it be followed up by action as well, or is that too much to expect from Justin Trudeau?
Ambassador Mukherjee said what the Indian diaspora should do in Canada to grow their influence and expand their influence to counter the separatist influence. But I want to tell you that in addition to that, Indian government has to do also a lot more work. You have to have a more proactive foreign policy, a more assertive foreign policy. Your security and intelligence services, as I mentioned before, although one of your colleagues disputed me, you can't do unilateral operations in Canada or in the US and go and kill people you want. You can't do that. You have to work with those security and intelligence services. If you try to do the operations that some services do, you will have a lot of problems. So it's true, India is a big country, but you have to be patient, you have to persevere and work with RCMP, with CSIS with the state police services. It's very difficult. It's very tough because of the deep influence that the Sikhs have created. Similarly, I have seen the Tamil Tigers have created very deep networks. But at the same time, so many terrorist attacks were prevented because CSIS and the security and intelligence services overseas work together. They are very professional services. On the part of the politicians, I must say, the Canadian politicians, they are driven by donations by the Sikh community, by the Tamil community, by the what is called constituency pressure, right? But don't ever think that you can do unilateral operations without doing joint training, joint operation to advance your security aims and objectives. This I want to give a very clear message to India and to the Indians and to my colleagues here. Work with the Canadians.
Yeah, Uday, I just want to make a point.
Yes,
Sorry,
Professor
Nalappa.
You have to work with all these governments and countries where you have problems.
Right.
If you don't work with them, these problems are going to grow.
Madhu Nalappa.
Thank you.
Now, Uday, I just want to say that my point was identifying them. My point was not basically about the kind of action that India has been accused of doing, which I frankly cannot believe has been done. It's a question of identification, and Professor Gunatra is quite right. Where the other operations are concerned, frankly, it should be left to the Canadian authorities. We provide the information and then they do the action everywhere. But what I meant was identifying them, and what happens is what happened in Afghanistan. When you had the ISI helping the US, they identified, and after the Taliban was defeated, the ISI identified anti-Taliban Afghans as very pro-Taliban, and the US military went after them, and very anti-Taliban elements as pro-Taliban, and so the whole point is the whole picture got confused. Those who were really supporting the Taliban were left unhindered, and those who were opposing the Taliban were attacked, and as a consequence, the Taliban came back to power. So I don't want a similar mistake to happen in Canada. So joint surveillance, no. Operations, again, no joint. It should be done entirely by the local authorities. Uday.
I wanted to clarify also, Uday,
yes,
that India has never said that we have conducted operations involving extrajudicial assassinations on other soil. I would like to bring to the attention of Professor Gunaratna that activity is only endorsed for big players who go after, for instance, Osama bin Laden and take them out, thereby demonstrating that international law is two-faced, one for the big boys and one for the smaller boys. And let's not forget what Bishop Desmond Tutu said. He said, I don't want to eat crumbs thrown at me from the high table. I want to sit at the high table and eat the bread too. And as far as India is concerned, we have never conducted extrajudicial assassinations. We have never accepted these ridiculous accusations brought by the Canadian Prime Minister and his coterie. We have repeatedly said, extradite these terrorists to India. They have murdered so many people. We have a very vigorous foreign policy, but it does not involve extrajudicial assassinations. Whether it should and whether international law should be the same for everyone, it's for all of us to reflect that it's okay, it's kosher to kill Osama bin Laden in Pakistan, but it's not kosher to extradite terrorists wanted in India, and it's kosher to give them shelter in Canada and then shed crocodile tears when they are killed in gang wars, which are then immediately traced to the Indian government. I take very strong exception to such insinuations being made on national television in my country.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Yes, point taken. We've run out of time. We're going to have to leave it at that. My thanks to our guests for joining us on this discussion.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.